Okay, so then when we get to the gospel passage for this upcoming Sunday, the 29th Sunday in ordinary time, Jesus gets mixed in with some political things. There's like with so many things. This is the unfortunate thing, that there are politics involved in just about everything. Unfortunately, you'd think within religion that politics wouldn't get involved, but they do. And so Jesus gets a tricky question, actually, and it's intended to be tricky. So anyway, so the gospel passage is from Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through 21, which comes right on the heels of last weekend's gospel, which finished with verse 14. So we remember that Jesus is within the temple area, and he's speaking primarily to the religious leaders. And we're gonna see here specifically the different groups that he's speaking to. So anyway, let's get into it. Matthew 22, verses 15 through 21. The Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap Jesus in speech. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And you are not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. Tell us, then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not?" Knowing their malice, Jesus said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin that pays the census tax." Then they handed him the Roman coin. He said to them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" They replied, "Caesar's." At that he said to them, "Then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." Okay, there we go. So this is tricky. Now, I think something that's very, very helpful to know. Well, a couple of things, right? So the Pharisees, they're doing what? They're plotting how to trap Jesus in their speech. So in other words, they're trying to come up with like a question, which anytime we're stuck with this, like, okay, I get it if you just don't believe in him. If you don't believe in Jesus, fine, whatever. I think you're wrong, but I understand that. But if you're trying to get to a point where it's like, okay, this guy's bothersome, and I want to try to trick him. So what's a question that I can ask that, like, I got you, And we run into people like this in today's world too, where it's just like, oh yeah, well, what does Jesus say about, it's just like, okay, you just don't try to trick him. Don't try to mess with him. So anyway, that's something. And these are religious leaders. So people who, at least in title and in theory, have given themselves over to God. And so in some ways, maybe I guess I understand it, because Jesus comes in and he's he's ruffling a bunch of feathers. And I guess if you don't believe in him, but you see that your friends are believing in him, then maybe it makes sense to try to trip him up, to try to prove that he's not really who he says that he is. Nonetheless, there's malice in their minds. There's malice in their hearts, because they're plotting. Rather than just going to him and expressing their difficulties, they're plotting. So anyway, they have disciples. This is we know about disciples of Jesus, but we have to understand that the other religious leaders, other people of the day, had disciples. Similarly, we know different professions in today's world. We don't really call them disciples, but we have different professions where people they follow others around and they learn from them so that they can become just like them. Maybe not in their entire lifestyle, but in their different professions. So I guess that would be a difference between like an apprentice and a disciple, maybe. But nonetheless, the Pharisees had disciples, people who were studying. In fact, St. Paul would have been a disciple of Gamaliel, or I think he calls him a student, but which is basically the same thing as a disciple. So anyway, so they had disciples. And they do what? They send their disciples with the Herodians. Now, this is a really big thing. The Pharisees and the Herodians did not get along. They were enemies of each other. There were different religious groups, the Sadducees and the Herodians and the Pharisees and, the scribes and, all these different people. And they didn't all really get along. The Sadducees didn't like the Pharisees. The Pharisees didn't like the Sadducees, didn't like the Herodians. The Herodians didn't like any of those. Like they disagreed with each other about certain things. Specifically, the Herodians and the Pharisees had differences of opinion regarding the occupation of Rome in Israel. Rome had, of course, all these, the tax system, and they had their troops and their soldiers, the centurions. This is the kinds of people that we run into in the gospel. And they were basically oppressing the Jewish people by taxing them heavily and restricting some of their freedoms, those kinds of things. And the Pharisees, of course, didn't like it. Whereas the Herodians were kind of laissez-faire about the whole thing. They're like, well, can't really do anything about it, so maybe it's not such a bad thing that they're here. Like, so they had disagreements. And, of course, the Sadducees would have had their own sort of nuance within that as well. But anyway, this is, so this is big, that the two now are working together to try to catch Jesus, to plot against him. That the Pharisees and the Herodians don't like each other, but they both agree on not liking Jesus, on hating Jesus. And so they work together to try to plot against them, which is, again, it's just kind of an unfortunate thing, a sad thing. Anyway, so when they go to Jesus and they say, teacher, we know that you're a truthful man, what are they doing? They're mocking him. They're patronizing him, which is just like, I read this and I want to stand up for Jesus and be like, hey, back off. But the thing is, Jesus doesn't need me to stand up for him because he's Jesus and he's okay. He sees clearly through it. And so they ask this question, okay, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? So this is their plotting question, their question that tries to trap Jesus. And it's a good trap. It's a good attempt anyway. Because if Jesus says, well, it's okay to pay taxes, then the Pharisees can go to all of the Jewish people and be like, can you believe this guy? This guy who comes in here and claims to be your savior, who claims to be your Messiah, he says actually that it's okay for us to pay the tax, that it's good that Rome taxes us so heavily, that Rome places such a heavy burden on our backs. And you want to believe this guy? You want to follow after him? This supporter of tyranny? I can't believe it, right? So if he says, okay, the tax is fine, but if he says the tax is not fine, that it's not good, it's not lawful to pay the tax, well, then the Herodians can go to their Roman friends and they can say, do you understand this renegade who's going around telling his people that they don't have to pay the tax, that it's actually not lawful for them to pay the tax? So if he answers yes or no, then either way he's stuck, right? So it is a legitimate attempt to trap him. And so, for us, it's like, okay, well, what's he going to say? I don't know. So anyway, so what does Jesus get? He knows their malice. Knowing their malice, right? Jesus sees into people's minds. He's not stuck on the surface like we all tend to be. He sees into them, their malice. We know this, that from other scenes in the gospel, Jesus can read people's thoughts. When he tells the man on a stretcher who's lowered down through the roof, he says, my sons, your sins are forgiven. He knows that the people, some of the people, the religious leaders watching this are like, who can forgive sins but God alone? And so Jesus says, knowing their thoughts, he repeats their thoughts back to them. And then he says, so that you may know the Son of Man has authority, I say to you, arise, pick up your mat, and go home. And so the same thing here. Jesus knows their malice. And so he says, why do you test me, you hypocrites? You're hypocrites. You who don't even like each other for intense reasons. Now you're joining forces to come and try to trick me. And as you come, you mock me and patronize me. Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Like this is something like, this is feisty Jesus, I think. I think this is feisty Jesus. We don't know the tone of his voice, but nonetheless, he's like, okay, show me the coin. Show me the coin. And so they hand him a coin. So a couple of commentators that I read, they said, their readiness to show him a coin reveals actually that they're frequently using the coin, and they're frequently finding themselves friendly with the Roman monetary system, because what happens is, as a result of this taxation and as a result of the monetary system that Rome had set up, it seems like all religious leaders received pretty good compensation, actually, that they benefited from the system that was in place. And so they're asking Jesus this question based on this sort of presupposition that the Roman system is oppressing God's people. Meanwhile, they're all of them are benefiting from the system. And so the fact that they're ready to hand over a coin is showing that they're hypocrites, not only in that they're mocking Jesus, but that they're also benefiting from the system, and they're okay to benefit from the system. They prove this by their readiness to find a coin. You'd think at the very least the Pharisee would be like, oh yeah, we got to find a coin. It's somewhere around here. I don't carry it around with me. But as it is, they had one at the ready. So anyway, they hand them a coin. And then Jesus says, whose image is this, and whose inscription? You might say, in whose image and likeness is this coin made, right? And so the coin had an image of Caesar on it. And so it's like, okay, Jesus says, well, they give the answer. So it's like, okay, well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. In other words, if you're gonna use their system, you got to play by their game. You got to play by their rules. But then he says, and to God what belongs to God. This is what belongs to God. Well, if the coin belongs to Caesar because it has his image and inscription on it, therefore it belongs to him, then what has God's image and inscription on it? Us. Our entire lives. We are made in the image and likeness of God. And the Lord says, I will write my laws on their hearts in this new covenant that he's going to establish. So what belongs to God? We do. So give to Caesar what belongs to him. Yes, if you're gonna use their money system, you got to play by the rules. But you're made in the image and likeness of God, and so therefore give your entire self to him. And not just your entire self, but this is the thing. What belongs to God? Really everything. Everything belongs to God because he made it all. And yes, we ourselves belong to him because we've entered into a covenant relationship with him. But we also are made to represent him on earth. And so all of the rest of creation belongs to him. And so we are stewards of his creation to approach the rest of his creation as he himself would approach creation, to approach the rest of creation in such a way that we acknowledge to the Lord that this has great value because he's made it. And this begins with our human interaction with each other, so that we're not approaching each other in a mocking, patronizing, hypocritical kind of way, but instead we see the goodness of each other in each other. But then also to understand, like, God rules over everything. And so I think this is something of a connection. When we consider like politics and government and different, monetary systems that we have for ruling our day, capitalism or socialism or whatever, we got to understand, like, God rules over all of it. He is sovereign. He rules over everything. Even those things that we don't necessarily think he rules over. The Roman occupation of Israel, the Lord ruled over that as well. Jesus entered into it at that particular time, in that particular situation, because he knew that was going to ultimately lead to what? To his crucifixion. Because without Rome and their method of execution, he wouldn't have been crucified. And, sure, they maybe would have killed him in other ways, but this is a way that can last and provide an image, a beautiful image for all of eternity. So anyway, it's a further thing of yes, when government is corrupt and requires us or demands that we do immoral things, maybe we don't have to do immoral things, but at the same time, to trust that the Lord is ruling over all things, and that he's in control ultimately, especially in control of those things that we feel like he's not, or that seems like is totally disconnected to him. I think that's like the connection here between our first reading and our gospel. Just as Cyrus, who was this pagan king who had seemingly no connection with the Lord, it says that the Lord was guiding him the entire way. In fact, I realized when I made the first video, or after I finished the first video, that I forgot to connect some of the things that I said I was going to connect with the verses before and the verses in between our jump. And those verses are all basically the same, just basically the Lord saying, look, you fulfill my every wish. You don't know it, but you're fulfilling my will. You don't know it, but I'm providing for you so that I can guide your steps to make the decision that needs to be made so that my people could be set free. And so in the same way here with the Roman occupation, with our government systems, however good or however corrupt they may be, the Lord's guiding it all, and we can trust in that, and we can trust that He's caring for us, providing for us in unseen and untold ways. There we go. Okay, we'll see for the next video. We start First Thessalonians, which I'm excited about. I love First Thessalonians. I love Paul's story with Thessalonica. So we'll see you for the next video. God bless you.